All right, we are live. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. We have a recurring and special guest tonight, Chris Blankenhorn. Chris, how are you?
Not bad. Hot.
Hot. it's hot.
Hot and tired.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's going to get hotter too, so hang in there. Chris is a very active member of the Green Party here, and we have him on often because he's sort of the go-to what's happening in the Green Party guy, and along with AJ as well. You and AJ are the kind of the two guys we go to. You also just have a very thorough and deep understanding of the history and the structure of the Green Party. You're like you're the Green Party's encyclopedia, if you will. So welcome back. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on. Let's get to it because we had you on about, I don't know, a little over a month ago, maybe a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember at the end of it, I was like, man, these shows just fly by.
Yeah.
I felt like we barely got started. So there was an issue I wanted to discuss. So let's start with that. We have the Green Party has 4 pillars and 10 party platforms. Grassroots democracy, diversity, nonviolence. So one of them is, I believe, number 8, is decentralization. And I studied system science, and decentralization, just from a very logistical sort of systemic point of view, is something very interesting, and I think people need to learn more about it. There's one of the kind of like a floating, if you will, adage in system science that sufficiently complex systems tend to run more efficiently when they are decentralized. Basic explanation is that there are simply too many variables for one central location to control it all efficiently. Now that's taking the human element completely out of it. It is purely systemic. So why don't you talk about that principle of decentralization, what it means to you, and how it's received and interpreted in the Green Party in general?
Yeah, I'll be blunt and say that I think the Green Party misinterprets and misapplies decentralization.
Okay.
It's we're decentralized because we believe that we're a bottom left political party, right? So we have kind of a fundamental belief that centralized power tends to corrupt. That's why if you look at our platform, it denounces both capitalism and state socialism. Because of the concern about centralized power. And you talked about efficiency and things like that. That's definitely part of it. And it with politics and society, it's kind of like it can work both ways, right? I'll say one area where I've kind of started shifting is the idea of, with climate change, we need a centralized solution. An autonomous, a million little communes that collaborate and work together and solve the climate crisis might have worked 50 years ago.
Right.
But we have 8 years.
Right.
And we're actually moving opposite of what we should be. Right. So that's somewhere where I've moved, and it's very Marxian in terms of we need a transitional state.
Right.
It's necessary, and I'm historically I'm more of an anarchist, but with the way the climate crisis is just really impending, with the amount of coordination that we need to have to actually properly address it, and not just we're still at a point right now in theory that if we really got our shit together, we could not just slow it, but eventually roll it back. But we can't do that with a completely decentralized, thing. So, but with politics, it can be a little tricky, right? Because I am very much a Marxist first and foremost in many ways, and so I believe that there needs to be a strong transition. It's not that slow transition can't happen, but that's a generational game. Right? To kind of have a non-violent, anarchist revolution and change of the society, that's a multi-generational thing that's happening, barring societal collapse and things like that. But it's a long game. So there's that. But when the Green Party talks about it, what we really want to do is emphasize, grassroots organizing, that power starts from below, and that's absolutely essential. My father has most of his life been a very prominent Republican in Illinois, and I was visiting recently, and we were up late talking politics, and we completely agree on something, and that is, no one is knocking doors anymore. No one is organizing in their communities anymore. Both the Republicans and Democrats both dump millions and millions of dollars into ads, mailers, all that kind of stuff, and they don't actually talk to people. And that create a huge void. And as Greens, we can't spend millions and millions of dollars. We don't have the resources to compete against capitalist parties, and we know that. But that means that we have to try something different. We have to be powerful through the grassroots, right? If we want to overcome ballot access stuff, it means we actually need members at the local level. It doesn't matter how strong our top is. We can't collect over 1 million petitions with a strong top without a bottom base, right? So, the goal, the reason that we call for decentralization is good, right? It's well intentioned. The Green Party is intersectional. Every single one of those 4 pillars and 10 key values ties into each other, right? Decentralization is key to have actual democracy. If you want to have democracy, it's got to be, decentralization and community engagement is key to actually realizing that, not just voting, right? Not just representative democracy. And I'm not necessarily someone who thinks representative democracy is necessarily bad, right? Direct democracy is very hard with millions and millions of people. So representative
on any level, it's mob rule. So don't forget, if 51% vote yes, 49% are screwed. So I get you.
Yeah. So we have this good idea, right? And it's important for us to have this fundamentally different idea. If we're just a gradation of the progressive Democrats, right? If we're just 7% left of Bernie, or something like that, why are we actually our own party, right? And it's something that a lot of new Greens don't understand, is that we have some really fundamentally different views. It's not just we have a slightly different take on policy, right? Progressive Democrats, that most of their solutions are still oriented around paying businesses to be better on climate, right? Whereas green solutions are socialist solutions. They're about public ownership. They're about public solutions. They're about public investment, not private profit. And so, it's about, we talked earlier, one of the other 10 key values is diversity. Yeah. But diversity tends to be a liberal view, a liberal, kind of thing when it's actually put into play. It's tokenism and it's diverse oppressors. Whereas when you come into the Green Party, it's actually something I'd change about our 10 key values. I think we need to be talking a lot more about empowerment, community empowerment, bottom up empowerment, not putting a figurehead up that has, that is a different demographic than we're used to on top of, an oppressive system. So with, decentralization, and that's another point, right, where it's all intersection. It all intersects. So how does empowerment play out? Empowerment plays out for support for reparations. Empowerment plays out in terms of open borders. Empowerment plays out in terms of decriminalizing all drugs on the Portugal model, right? Not just here in Illinois. We like to tout we have the most progressive legalization, marijuana legalization scheme in the country. It's a capitalist cash grab. Right, it takes millions of dollars to even get in the industry. Prices are outrageous. There's nothing progressive really beyond and the things that we did do that we're touting as progressive are things that are common sense. The expungement of records, right? The pretending. I don't actually think we're realizing our investment in communities hurt by the drug war like we're supposed to, but there's lip service to the idea that they understand that these communities have been devastated by the drug war, but they're still being devastated by the drug war. We just took one drug out of the mix, right? So we have to be fundamentally different, and we are, right? When you look at the Green platform, we are fundamentally, the Republicans and the Democrats are far closer to each other politically than they are to us. Things like open borders, decriminalization, even Medicare for all. Right? We don't just need Medicare for all. We need Medicare for all, 100%. We need a universal system. But if we just set up Medicare for all, it becomes a feeding trough for big pharma, for private providers, for manufacturer, for medical and industry manufacturers. We need a national health service, right? We need a publicly owned, bottom-up, locally controlled national health service, and it's a fundamentally different proposal than just expanding the current Medicare system. So we have these values, and they do, when you really start thinking about them and talking about them, we're calling for something totally different. And the decentralizations, and it's important, and decentralization is the same way, right? Decentralization, we're countering this top-down structure that the American capitalist parties have. The problem is green decentralization, and in many ways, general left decentralization. I've been in other left organizations that are decentralized, and many of them have these same problems. Joe Freeman, decades ago, during the women's, as part of her response to the women's rights movements, wrote a great piece called "The Tyranny of Structurelessness." And it really gets into kind of talking about some of the ideas, and it's not to say that decentralization is a bad idea. It's talking about what happens when decentralization goes wrong, right? When decentralization goes wrong, it empowers bad actors. When decentralization goes wrong, it allows for a lot of trickery to happen. It allows for a lot of power plays to happen, things like that. If decentralization goes right, all of that is buffered by democracy, right? But so in the Green Party, what decentralization has tended to kind of manifest itself as, and I just put the Joe Freeman into the chat for everybody, but how it's manifested itself has kind of been anything goes, everybody do what you want. And that's not decentralization, that's chaos. Right?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, for sure. Okay. So, but I think that I don't, when I first joined the Green Party, I had seen the 10 party platforms, and I'd read them over. I'm like, okay, yeah, I agree with all that. In a very kind of a brief and vague sense at the time, because I wanted to be a part of the Green Party. But I think most people consider the Green Party to be the Green Party because of environmentalism, and that is not its only mission, but definitely its main one. Does decentralization have anything to do with that? Is it some sort of solution to environmental? I know what you're saying by the fact that at the point we're at now, but the originators of the Green Party, do you know what they had in mind when they put decentralization in there?
Well, even what I'm talking about, where I'm saying we need a strong central solution, we need strong central planning and coordination, but the actual carrying out of it, right? The delivering of the changes that we need has to be done at local first, right? I always come back to this, right? I'm a Marxist at heart. So I fundamentally believe that the revolution looks different in every community. What environmental racism looks different in Chicago than it does in Springfield, than it does in Carbondale. Right. What kind of problems we need to address in various areas, looks completely different. The solutions to, one thing I talk about a lot is that the problems of rural communities and the problems of inner city working class communities are often identical, but they manifest in different ways, right? They both have problems with jobs, with quality jobs in the area. They both have problems with access to services, especially healthcare, right? They both have, problems with the economics leaving the majority of people behind. They manifest a little different, but the problems are very much the same. So decentralization is key, right? Because when we say we need community-controlled national health service, what we're saying right now, how that would work, if the Democrats implemented Medicare for all, they would apportion a specific amount of money to Medicare every year, and it would be doled out, and most people probably wouldn't get everything they needed, because they set the number, and then regardless of the need. Right. So when you have community control, when you decentralize the centralized system, now Springfield gets to talk. Now, you can have elected boards talking about, community meetings, talking about what do we need. And they send that up and they say, this is what we need. You need to budget for it. So decentralization is really key. Right. But a big part of, to circle back to, the perception of the Green Party. In some ways, we always kind of, we have these four pillars, right? And when you look at them, they're very intersectional. They cover all of this, but ecology has always been really central. Right. Especially when you look at the foundations of the Green Party in Europe and then into the U.S., especially like in Germany where really first grew strong. They had capitalists to the left of them and state socialists to the right. And I'm not saying that politically, I'm saying that geographically, right? If we're looking at a map, they have Western Europe to the left of them, and they have the Soviet bloc to the right, or the former Soviet bloc, depending on the time period, right? And so they're seeing non-ecological solutions from both areas. Both of those systems were dominating oriented systems, right? The earth was there for extraction, for resources. And now we can have many, many hours of conversation about the qualitative differences between, the Western Europe's capitalist profits orientation for what that exploitation meant versus, at least the ideals of the Soviet Union in terms of bettering the people through those. You can't really deny their massive industrialization and improvement in a lot of areas. You can decry a lot of things, but that they shifted ahead centuries in a matter of decades, and it did generally often improve people's lives in some key ways. So at the core they were searching for an ecological thing. When you look at the origins of the Green Party of the United States, it came out of the committees of correspondence, which were email listservs. I gotta say, the Green Party in too many ways still operates like it's 1984, and we're operating on Green Party listservs in too many ways. But at our first convention in 1984, most people came representing an organization, so like a movement. If you followed 2020 and Howie Hawkins, you probably often heard it said that he was a co-founder of the Green Party because he was at that 1984 founding meeting. He was also on C-SPAN when the official national political party formed in 1991. But in 1984, he was there as a representative of the Clamshell Alliance, which was, he wasn't there as a representative of the future Green Party of New York. Or he might not even have been in New York at that point. He might have been still in Vermont or something. But he wasn't there representing a future Green Party. He was there representing an existing anti-nuclear movement that had successfully shut down the construction of nuclear plants and, heavily contributed to a decades-long freeze of nuclear plant construction. It was never banned, but we just stopped investing in it because the opposition was so great and the costs are just much like a decentralized, a decentralized solution to climate change, right? I said we're 50 years past that being viable. The same could be said as nuclear as a gap fuel, a bridge fuel. Maybe if we had set them up, decades ago, caring about climate, but we didn't. So when you talk about nuclear now, it takes over a decade to build one of these plants most of the time. In Illinois, it's in the last, I think, 8 years, we've subsidized them with $5 billion. Right? The last climate bill that the Democrats are really bragging about and touting, it has twice the amount of money for subsidies for nuclear as it does for renewable energy. Right? Wow. So they've become uneconomical, and even if there are nuclear things that we should not necessarily say no so hard to, like Greens tend to, they're not viable solutions at this point, right? They were viable solutions decades ago, or they needed to be. So that there's all of that, but that's another way, right, where we're fundamentally different. It's not just a gradation. We're a little left on climate from the Democrats, right? No. The Democrats' climate bills are mostly corporate handouts.
Right.
and do very little to address the climate in many cases. So, there's all that. But so when the first Green Party first met, it was a collection of issues activists, right? It was a decentralized thing to that point. It was that that we weren't even coming together as Greens. And when you say the perception, it might be kind of skewed about what our policies are and what our priorities are. I think a big part of it comes from that. The Green Party in many ways remains a collection of issues activists, not a unified, flank of a party. There are people here because they're, I know people I know Greens who if I were to analyze many of the positions that they have, I'd either say they're a libertarian who believes in Medicare for all, or they're a Republican who believes in climate change. Right? But if you believe in Medicare for all or you believe in climate change, there's no other place to go. Right? Neither the Republicans or the Democrats are serious about climate change. Neither the Democratic base is 90-something% in favor of Medicare for all, but they can't pass it. Obama promised it and broke his promise, and he controlled both houses and the executive. So because we exist in a world where they have these two far right parties, right? We have a far right party and we have a right party, right? The left flank, the Democratic Party, in terms of political theory and a real spectrum, not a U.S. spectrum, but a real political spectrum, Bernie's left of center, right? Not even left wing, left of center, still defined in the center, because his policies are generally capitalist. So we've gone 35 years, and in many ways have remained this collection of issues activists, right? And it's and part of it is this culture of decentralization that says our culture of not decentralization, of misinterpreted decentralization that says anyone do what you want. As long as you can say you abide by the 10 key values, have your issue that you fight for. And it means that a lot of the stuff gets left behind, right? I know for a fact, we've got a chapter in Illinois that basically only does Medicare for all. They'll do some other stuff, but in terms of what they actually, organize around, that is their 80% of their time spent on that. So if you're in that town, that's what you think the Green Party is about. But it comes, when to circle back into decentralization in general, I've talked a lot about what it shouldn't be, how we mess it up. The thing that people in about decentralization is running a decentralized organization takes more organization, takes more communication, takes more work than running a top-down one, right? Decentralization doesn't mean that we don't set up lines of communication because no one can tell us to. Decentralization should mean that we are fervently setting up lines of communication so that we can communicate and support each other. Because, as decentralized, organizing takes place, it just by definition means there's less resources. Or they're more diversified, right? They're scattered. So we need to be better at working together. For me, it comes down to a big thing, and it's long been a fight, right? The Green Party is split in the past over the idea of electoralism versus movement work. That's what the split regarding it was when the Association of State Green Parties, the ASGP, separated from the GPUSA, which was the more movement-oriented. The ironic thing about it, from my understanding, is that the GPUSA was running more candidates than the ASGP anyway. So I think it was actually more of an ideological split that was framed as a philosophy split, a tactic split. But, the Green Party is often had a problem embracing an organizing culture. And if you're going to have an actual decentralized movement, you need a movement full of organizers, right? People who are collaborating, people who are communicating, people that are supporting each other. You don't need chaos. Decentralization requires extreme levels of connection and coordination. And in many ways, and it's a fatal thing for the Green Party. In too many times, it manifests as a disconnection when we really need an extreme connection.
Okay, yeah, no, that's all very interesting. And the changing the diversity to empowerment, I think that's very interesting. Any other ones you would either nix or change or tweak a little bit? Because I have one that I would get rid of personally.
Personal responsibility.
You would get rid of that?
Yeah, I would gratefully change it.
Okay,
70% of the emissions come from 100 companies, not me and you, right? I have no, thinking about COVID, it's funny because the party of personal responsibility, the Republican Party, it was them and their members who showed a complete lack of ability to carry out even a little bit of personal responsibility, like wearing a mask. Right? They like to preach it when they're talking about social service programs, but when it comes to public health, they weren't interested. But and so I don't have a problem with personal responsibility. There's a role of it. Julia Kristeva, a Marxist psychologist, talked about a psychic revolution. Right? We all have to have an internal revolution before we can really have, and I'm not talking, before we can, really engage in revolutionary activities. And I'm not necessarily talking about, picking up guns and starting a revolution, but I'm also definitely not talking about voting for a progressive Democrat. Right? You have to have an internal shift in perspective that isn't just a gradation before you can really start organizing for something different. So, there is a level of personal, right? I live on a corner, and one thing COVID taught me was that it isn't the school across the street that creates the litter. Sure, I find Johnny's homework every once in a while, but it's just assholes driving down the street throwing things out of their car, right? Sure. That person's an asshole, right? They should exercise a little personal responsibility and drop it off at the next of many garbage cans that we all encounter in our life. But that person's also not the cause of climate change. That person's also not the cause of, the environmental crises that we face. That litter is not the problem. So I don't have a problem with, personal responsibility, but I don't think we should be centering it as opposed to centering, systemic change.
Yeah, because the way the platform that one reads is personal and global accountability, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you're okay with the global part?
Yeah, and so one thing you have to understand about Green Party, and it goes a lot to what I've, the Party of Issues activists. Frankly, for a long time with the original Greens, there was a lot of conflict aversion, a lot of making everybody happy. So the Green Party platform's a camel. And to use that term, and if you don't know what I mean by that, it means a camel is a horse made by committee.
Camel is a horse made by a committee?
Yeah. So you put a group of people together and you tell them to create a horse, and you're going to get something like a camel. Because they each have.
I had never heard that before. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a saying to kind of illustrate that different perspectives of the same thing can lead to different outcomes. So,
sure.
You get a lot of stuff in the Green Party where a bold statement is made and then a kind of step back is taken because there was offense taken or a nuance was wanted to be brought out that kind of undermines things. So when I think about personal and global responsibility, that phrase still means that I need to think globally. Right, and we really need to stop. We need to get away from this I. Right? People, it's easy. If there's a person or a very specific organization that is responsible for all of the woes, if the Illuminati are real, that's an easy solution. We just have to get rid of the Illuminati, right? If Joe Biden or Donald Trump is the problem, cool. We just need to elect a new person. But that doesn't address the core problems. That doesn't address the systems that actually that pave the way and allow these people to be awful. So I don't like the personal responsibility, because I think we need to flip what we're doing. And when you look at how this plays out in terms of policy, right? The Biden administration is a perfect example of personal responsibility environmentalism. You need to buy an electric vehicle. You need to put solar panels on your house. Okay, who's going to give me tens of thousands of dollars for an electric vehicle? Who's going to give me tens of thousands of dollars for solar? And they say, well, we made it tax breaks. Well, I still have to put the money up front. I don't have $50K sitting around to put solar panels on my house, even if you're going to give me 30 back in taxes, right? When you focus on personal responsibility, it almost always leads to classist, implementation of policy. Whereas opposed when you focus on systemic things, you can really start breaking down the things that keep our rigid classes in place, that keep that rigid oppression in place. I'm seeing a lot of people talk about the need for mental health in the United States, following, and I'm not saying it's not absolutely true, because it is, but I'm hearing almost none of them tethering it necessarily with Medicare for all. How do we give wider access to mental health care as part of a solution to addressing our violent culture, without ensuring equal access? And it may not necessarily apply when it comes to school shootings as much, in terms of the Medicare for all. Like, we're not generally seeing poor working class kids doing mass shootings in their school, or going to an elementary school or middle school and killing people, right? They tend to come from a little bit more affluent families that can afford an assault rifle and body armor and things like that, right? But it's an important question. If we're actually concerned about medical health in this country, we need to make sure everyone has access, both in terms of being able to go, right, without getting a devastating payment, but also actually being able to get a doctor. I know from talking to people, it's really hard to get actually into mental health appointments, even if you have access, right? And then try living in a part of the city that has no access to healthcare, that doesn't have facilities, right? I live in the Central Illinois Medical District. If I stood on my deck in the backyard, I can see 2 hospitals. They're 6 blocks apart, right? Our entire medical industry is crammed into one little part of town, and there's whole sections of town. And then, so if you go to the middle class, more white side of town, you find nice new prompt cares and nice new orthopedic centers and all of that. If you go to the working class, east, south, and north, well, east and south, of the medical centers on the north side of downtown, so I won't count us. But if you go to the east side, which is our really working class, skewing into more Black communities, south side, same way, they have almost no services, right? They don't even have a shitty clinic, let alone a nice new one. So there's that. Ethan just in the chat just mentioned the VA. We need the VA, right? But a well-funded and for everyone VA, where the doctors are public servants that are paid a good wage, right? One of the main clinics in my town really likes to tout that it's doctor owned, and I can tell you, as someone that was uninsured for most of their adult life, it didn't make me feel any better that the doctor in the room was the one pocketing the money. Right? The doctor, and actually, I'll be honest, the doctor-owned clinic in town is the least, if you're uninsured, you don't go there. They make you sign forms that you will pay. You have to pay them $240 before you even walk in to talk to somebody, right? When I go to like one of the it's still private, but when I go to one of the non-doctor-owned hospitals, I get or ER or prompt care, I get a bill and it says immediately at the bottom, they cut my bill in half because I'm uninsured, right? Mm-hmm. So, and a big part of implementing all of this, on this whether it be Medicare for all, whether it be changing our manufacturing, all of this is we're going to have to really invest in development in our communities, right? We can't just have Medicare for all. The Democrats, from what I see, they just kind of give everyone insurance and do nothing else, right? We've got to address the unequal access. We've got to address the unequal services. We've got to address all of it, which means we need a much bigger systemic problem, change.
Yeah, well, Ethan's just kind of going down a list of things that if it happens to you, the coverage of the cure should be free. Mental, let's say just being sick, veterans, glasses, hearing aids. Yeah, I mean, no, all these things should be accessible to all people equally. I agree, 100%.
It would be cheaper.
Yeah, no, I mean, the
than what
numbers
we
are.
do now.
We all know
Yeah.
that they're going to be cheaper. Anybody who says otherwise is not listening or not reading or is just an ass.
And this is a publicly popular policy. The majority of Republicans.
Who would not want access to healthcare? Like, why would you possibly be opposed to something like that? That's crazy. Like, you got to be a pretty bad person to not build. I don't know. Okay, I don't even have my moral high horse here, but it baffles me that anybody might be against it. So okay. Ethan, by the way, thank you for joining us today. And anybody else, there's a comment section here on the right, folks. If you want to chime in, ask a question, make a comment, crack a joke, whatever you want.
I use StreamYard a lot, so I'm watching it live.
Right on. What was I going to say? So the decentralization thing, again, going back to like the Green Party is the Green Party because of its emphasis on environmental issues, climate change, pollution, whatnot, deforestation. Nuclear power plants were kind of it seemed to be the inception of it, at the inception of it, which is still an issue today, like you had mentioned. I do know that there are some people, you could talk a lot about like leftism, progressivism, capitalism, Marxism, that kind of thing. I do know that there are some people in the Green Party that might not even really kind of tend to those parts of the party's platforms, like the economics of it. They're in it because of the environmental stuff. That's it. A lot of them, I met several that are they just became disgruntled Democrats and didn't know where else to go. So that they kind of defaulted to us, which then they're perfectly happy. I'm not saying they're not. But let's talk about a little bit about economics. So this is going to happen again. We're going to run out because I want to get to voter ballots, but I'm not even sure we're going to be able to touch it because I want to talk a little bit about economics and the difference between like Marxism and capitalism. We don't need to go too deep into that, but and the perception of Green Party members concerning those things. I've met a couple of Green Party members that are say no, I'm a capitalist, 100%. Okay. Yep. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, there's a spectrum of different ways of viewing capitalism. I get that. I think there's a bit of a false narrative here in this country concerning it. Capitalism does not merely mean a free market. I'm not even sure that's a part of the original definition. It means an economic system that has the private ownership of capital. That's what it means. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, but anyway,
most
go ahead.
Of those people saying they're capitalists aren't capitalists. They don't own their means of their production.
Right, exactly. So anyway, with all the crap I just spewed at you there, go ahead, pick something and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, so I think an important thing to understand is the Green Party is a multi-tendency party, and that doesn't just mean and we get hit at this by other left parties, well, you've got liberal capitalists in your party. Yeah, we do. And we've also got Maoists, and we've also got Leninists, and we've also got Trotskyites, and we've also got bottom left anarcho-communists.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
We've also got Bernie progressives that are generally capitalists. Progressive capitalists. We're a multi-tendency party, and to be frank, we're not by any means perfect. But I haven't seen any other. I've been a member of numerous leftist groups that were multi-tendency. And they don't operate. They're generally racked with sectarianism. And if you go on never join the Green Party National Committee, right? If you want to see Greens fighting over this inside baseball nonsense, join the Green Party National Committee. It's awful. It kept me away from the party for 2 years when I first joined.
Oh, wow.
But when you look on the ground, right, we find commonalities. We organize towards solutions. And as socialists in the party, a big thing we need to be doing is education. And that doesn't mean shouting at someone to read something. That means a lot of listening. And we need to do education in our own party and in our communities, right? I always tell people when I give workshops about organizing, people say, well, where should I target first in my organizing if I'm trying to start a community, a Green Party in my community? Your neighbor, and then the neighbor on the other side, and then the person beyond them, and the person beyond them. Right? No one needs you to go on a white horse into their community to try to save them as the Green Party. In fact, that does us a lot of damage. The white, progressive, liberal, socialist left has a bad rep for a reason in that white horse sense, right? So what we need to be doing is talking to people, right? When you meet that Green that says that they're a capitalist, have conversations with them. And honestly, don't come at them and say, why do you think you're a capitalist? Begin to build a relationship, right? Begin to have conversations. When they start talking about how, corporatism, for example, right? People love to talk about corporate capitalism, which is just capitalism, right? But when they say that, now you have an opening. Right, you need to listen, and you need to be the job of a socialist organizer, especially in the phase we're at, where education is key. It's what we need to be doing almost as more than organizing actual, people. Your job is to make connections, not to tell people. You need to let people express themselves, right? An example would be, if I'm talking to someone in my town and they're complaining about the poor quality of our streets and the poor quality of our sidewalks. One of the first things I say is, well, do you know anything about our town's funding? And they almost always say no. And I said, well, did you know that the police department and the public works department put in about the same budget request each year? More or less, they ask for the same amount of money. The police department gets 98%, and the parks department gets 32%. Right? So why are your roads bad? Because our town has prioritized in investing in authoritarianism. Our town has prioritized investing in, police and state power over putting, public money into public good. And so with that conversation, now we're talking about cops in a totally different light than if you just came in yelling, defund the police. Right? So when you hear the person start talking about corporatism, well, how does this happen? Right? Now we can start having a conversation about what does corporatism mean? Right? And then you can start bringing in like, well, have you ever worked for small businesses? Because in many ways, they're Elon Musk wannabes, right? I've worked for corporations and I've worked for small businesses, and there's pros and cons for each, but sometimes I got to say, at least the corporation has an HR department, even if they're not on your side, right? When you work for a family business and, they won't address things because they want to keep their home life intact. That's a very oppressive thing, right? Many small businesses, because of the economy of scale, are running on much tighter margins, and that means they're exploiting people even more. To be mean about it, right? Workers are paying so that the boss can pretend to be a capitalist. They're subsidizing for their LARPing boss, for their live action role playing capitalist boss, right? But that's the mean way to say it, right? When you're a socialist organizer and you're talking to someone who's not one of us, right? Who's not already in, that's not the conversation you have. You have the conversations that start to open some ideas, and you have that conversation about what corporatism is. And then a week later, they're talking about, climate change. And now we can talk. Now it's, hey, did you know that 70% of pollutions or emissions are caused by 100 companies? Let's tie this into corporatism now. Let's talk about capitalism and how this manifests, right? Capitalism is a total system. When Marx was writing it was almost a proto-system, right? He was seeing the development of something new, and in many ways he couldn't envision, and there's no way you could envision what was going to happen. It's why Marxism is also not something that started and ended with Karl Marx. It's a methodology, a way of thinking, a way of analyzing the world. And because it is that, right, when Marx was writing, and Marx was changing his mind, right, because revolutions started happening. and the commune happened, and he had to kind of reassess, right? Because life happened and the world was changing. But when he was writing, there was a distinct English culture, a distinct German culture, a distinct Italian culture. There was a distinct, whether you were from Hamburg or different parts of Germany, right? We were still kind of on the tipping point of city-state and nation-state.
Sure.
There was no way you could see capitalist culture in its modern day that is total, that is global, and Hollywood makes movies for everyone, and there's no way. And so, because it's a methodology, you have Gramsci coming in the 20s, and Gramsci introduces this idea of hegemony, of how much of a society believes in something or not. Gramsci's writing from prison, and thank you. How far does an apple fall from the tree? Pete Buttigieg, our transportation secretary, his dad is who translated Gramsci's prison diaries.
Wow.
His dad is a socialist, a bottom-left socialist.
That's very cool.
He is a right-wing Republican who is now transportation secretary, despite his only transportation experience being gutting his local transportation, right? And now he preaches electric vehicles for Tesla. But, so he came in with that. And it was like, okay, whoa, we're evolving. We're seeing culture start to go. And then World War II happened, right? And it globalization went nuts. And now we've got so Gramsci was starting to see the beginning of it, right? Like Marx was seeing the beginning of capitalism. Gramsci was seeing the beginning of global capitalism. Post World War II, you've got Adorno and Horkheimer who come in, and they're like the culture industry, and talking about how culture is being manufactured and distributed as a as a product, as something that is for profit. Then you get into, Guy Debord and the Situationists in May '68 and the Society of the Spectacle, and talking about how, why does that worker think they're a capitalist? Because they've been sold a myth of capitalism, right? The spectacle of capitalism has been presented in a way that they're just taking in propaganda and accepting it, right? And then you got Kristeva comes in and mixes Freud in, and Angela Davis comes in and mixes race in, and and then you get amazing queer authors that come in, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 right? And we start to see the intersectionality. So I think, a key thing for the, socialist, independent green socialists is, making sure we're talking about that intersectionality. Right, that racial oppression and gender oppression and gender and sexuality and identity oppression and able-bodied oppression, like these are all tied into each other. They're all tied into capitalism. So as organizers, our job of organizing a mass socialist party is one of communicating, building relationships, and slowly making these connections to people. It's not to tell someone to read something. It's to help them see the things in their real world life and their experiences in a new light, and try to get them to look past kind of superficial stuff. Not that the superficial stuff can be super important in their day-to-day life, right? It's like when I've met many a leftist who write off electoralism completely. And I say, well, how is someone going to get health care? And they say, well, I've literally had someone say they'll have health care after the revolution. So they won't. Okay, cool. Got it. You don't care about uninsured people. Thank you for letting that be known. Academic leftist who just posts on Facebook and doesn't organize.
Wow.
So, and on the topic of electoralism, we've got to have multiple fronts of action, right? A multiplicity of tactics. If we combined every single leftist party, and I'm trying to transition you towards ballot access, if we took every leftist party in this country and combined their vote, which a vote is not to say it is the end all be all most important, or even important at all measure of power, but it's one that we can count, right? So if we combined us all and we all locked step and we all voted for the same presidential candidate, we'd get less than 2%. Right? None of us have figured this out yet. So because of that, we need to be engaging in mutual aid work. We need to be engaging in community organizing. We need to be engaging in workplace organizing. We need to be heavily embedded in movements. And when we're in those movements, we need to be advocating for independent solutions, right? Movements in this country tend to be funneled into the major two parties, which is a graveyard. So we've got to make sure that we're engaged in many ways, but that also means, like it or not, a lot of power in this country is sequestered in electoralism, right? I don't like it, but the fact is a huge amount of power in our society comes from who is in power.
There's no, absolutely. I agree 100%.
From local to bottom.
And
so we have to fight there.
No, there are a multitude of fronts on which we need to fight on, and that is one.
We can't give it up. And that doesn't mean you need to fight on it, but it means you need to have critical support for those that are. Right? We really need to learn the idea of multiplicity of tactics paired with, radical solidarity, where we're supporting each other's work.
Right. We're not going to get to voting our ballots because we only have a couple minutes left, but that means we're just going to have you back because that's a huge conversation. That might even take up the entire hour next time.
It's really interesting in Illinois, just to give a real quick, what I would say on voting is we don't just need ranked choice voting. It's got to be paired with ballot access, 100%. And it's got to be paired with proportional representation. If you want to actually get past the post, where 51% of people get to be a dictator over 49% of the people, right? You need proportional representation. To get that in legislative bodies, you need multi-member districts, which Illinois used to have. It's not a radical idea. They exist in Maryland. Illinois used to have them until Pat Quinn got rid of them. Really? And he did it as a budget saving. We're paying too many legislators. Democracy's too expensive, right?
Yeah.
Says the man who went after the unions first, went after their pensions first.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Okay. So real quick, hopefully this is according to Ethan. Hopefully the Starbucks and Amazon workers who currently see all the pushback from the capitalists realize what's really going on. Starbucks is going to regret paying for employees to go to college. It's also said Bernie could have led a DNC walkout or a march on the Capitol, but he won't. And the BLM tinderbox didn't last. And he's asking, what is multi-member districting? If you can give us a 30-second answer to that, then we're going to call it. Go ahead.
Yeah, multi-member districting is so your district would have 3 representatives, and they'd be proportionally split. So if a Democrat got 40%, a Republican got 30, if a Democrat got 50, a Republican got 40, and a Green got 10, that split's a little wrong as I'm in my head, but it's a way to get multiple parties in power, basically, right? Instead of just the one wins, the top 3 win. So you have a top 3 race for your legislative seat. To address the Amazon and Starbucks thing real quick.
Yeah.
I think it's really important for us to understand what's happening in this moment. The major unions failed. Right? The major unions tried to go into Bessemer, Alabama. They tried to organize top down, and this goes way back to what we talked about at the beginning, right? They tried to run a traditional top down paid organizer, airlifted in organizer, and I've been that airlifted in organizer for unions. They went into Bessemer and they failed. When we look at union, I'm unendingly supportive of organized labor. But when we look at major corporate unions, in many ways, they've become collaborationists these days.
Right.
They're there to make deals with management and with capital over slight cost of living bumps that aren't even matching inflation and healthcare. And that's a big part of why we've seen them fade, right? Certainly the capitalist war against unions is a big part of why union membership is steadily decreased for decades. But so is the actions of the unions. So is the way they organize. So when we look at the victories at Amazon and the victories at Starbucks, Amazon in particular, right? That was a guy who got fired, and he said no. In Chris Smalls, and he got some people that worked there. Their organizers were based in the warehouse.
Right.
They were organizing themselves. It wasn't UCFW. It wasn't SEIU. It wasn't millions of big dollars. It was sweat. It was sweat and blood equity, and it was put on the line by the workers that actually worked there, and they won, right? And the same goes with Amazon. It is not these major unions that are organizing Amazon, right? It's a bottom-up, worker-led movement.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I just had a few weeks ago, my brother-in-law, who worked at a fast food restaurant, said, "Help me organize." And so I reached out to the former head of my local trades and labor council, and I said, "Who's organizing service workers in town?" No one was his answer. We're the state capital here in Springfield. Every single major union has an office downtown. You know what they use it for? To kiss the ass of the people in the Capitol. They don't use it to organize workers. They don't use it to. They're there to beg and grovel, right? They're there to lobby. They're there to bribe. They're not doing the work they need to be doing for the people in our community. And so, when you look at what Chris Smalls did with the union and Amazon, so I helped with I'm part of the Green Socialist Organizing Project, which came out of Howie's campaign, and we run a series of workshops, 101 workshops that are quarterly, and we go Green Party 101, Socialism 101, Organizing 101. Green Party 101, Socialism 101, Organizing 101. And in our Organizing 101, the next one of those is going to be live streamed on Howie's page on the 23rd, so next Thursday. But we did our first one, and we brought together a collection of organizing ideas. We didn't tell people how to organize, right, in their green local, because like I said earlier, it's different everywhere. Your issues are different everywhere. Your focus is different everywhere. Your tactics and strategy are different everywhere. So we brought together some materials that may not directly apply to the work of organizing a third party, but that have good ideas as fundamentals. And one of the things we brought forward was Fraser's Organizing in the Steel Industry. It's a way to do bottom-up, one-on-one conversation where you talk to your coworkers and you get them on board and you organize your union that way. So when you try to apply it to building your green local, you're going to have to tweak it, right? Because this is about workers. This is about your workplace only. But it had these great ideas. So it was one of the things we presented. And then the next week, Chris Smalls was doing an interview, and they asked him what his guide was. And he said, "The Fundamentals of Organizing the Steel Industry," something published in the early 1900s, right? But it has fundamentally good ideas for bottom-up organizing, kind of in the realm of the IWW.
Right.
So, we started on decentralization in terms of how the Green Party has kind of mismanaged it. But these new union fights, these new union victories are actually showing us how decentralization used correctly by organizing, by having an organizing-centric decentralized movement or organization, is seeing major victories where big money couldn't win. And it all goes back to those relationships, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier for Amazon to press you if the dude working the other side, some guy that you don't know, doesn't know you, never lived in your community, and just showed up and told you to sign a union card, right? As opposed to the guy you've worked with on the line for the last 2 years that knows how you suffer, that's been through it, that's been injured like you. Now those conversations are way different because there's a real relationship, right? And that's key. When we're doing bottom-up relational organizing, deep canvassing, whatever you want to call it, it's about building those relationships, because really no one changes their mind because of a fight on the internet, right? Almost never. Yeah. I always said when I fought with people on the internet, I was actually doing it for the people who were watching quietly and not for the person I was fighting with, just
Yeah.
hoping that an idea would hit someone and they would go, oh, okay.
Yeah. Right.
The troll was never going to listen.
Right. Right.
So how you change people's ideas is you need them to connect it to their real life experiences, to people they have real life relationships and care for. To close that up real quick, when I was part of Redneck Revolt, before they collapsed, we had a member in Central Illinois who is an ex-vet. He spent his entire life as a conservative Republican, went through the military, and had that conservative military Republican view. A close friend came out as trans, and he watched their entire community turn on that person. And it broke him. He said, if the things I believe lead to that, I don't believe those things anymore.
Wow.
And he was not a hard socialist. He had very little political education beyond talking to us within the group. We were not pressing him to run around with a hammer and sickle. That's not what Redneck Revolt does anyway. Right. Redneck Revolt actually attracts the right wing with their guns. Like, oh, you like guns too? And then they're like, I do, but let's talk about capitalism. But for that, he completely flipped his worldview. Because of something that happened in his life. And no one would have been able to talk him into that flip. And that flip led him, when Donald Trump was elected, to publicly say, if anyone knows a undocumented family that needs to run, I've got a lot of property. I've got a lot of places that I can hide them. Right? So we went from a pretty far right, military-minded conservative, and in the matter of a couple of years, someone advocating for open borders and saying they will, hide undocumented immigrants and commit a crime themselves to protect them.
Yeah,
and it all happened because they saw the core hatred and the core, lack of humanity that is behind, some of this right-wing, movements. And we shouldn't cast them all like that, because frankly, no one else is talking to the rural communities. No one else is talking to, poor working class rural folks. Democrats don't talk to them. Greens don't talk to them. The Republicans get them wound up on social issues. They may all be racist right now, but they didn't have to be. They got abandoned, and they're being screwed over by the Republicans just as much as everybody else. So
very well.
It's really about those connections. That's what we got to do if we want to grow.
That's very cool. Very well said. Okay, Rob D. Rich says, "What's up, Chris?" with a little heart, and Chris, Mayor of Springfield. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Eleanor Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. Chris Blankenhorn, always a pleasure talking to you. Always fascinating to listen to what you have to say. Again, we have way more stuff to talk about, so we'll have you on again soon. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, be good, be green. Take care.
Have a good one. Thank you.
Good night.